Tumbling down the hill in downtown Madrid, El Rastro flea market is chaotic, historic, and endlessly entertaining, which is why I put it alongside the Prado as one of those things you just can't miss off an itinerary in Madrid. So in this episode, I'm going to give you a complete guide to El Rastro, covering not only its history, but also how to get the best out of a visit. My name is Felicity Hughes. I'm a journalist and tour guide based in Madrid, and you may have seen my name in Lonely Planet, as I'm the chief writer for the city. I do this podcast completely free of charge, but it's a big time commitment. So if you've enjoyed an episode, please give me a rating consider getting a copy of my guide to Madrid's more tranquil side, which is called Quiet Madrid. You could also think about getting one of my audio guides on Voicemap. There's a lot more information on my website, themakingofmadrid.com. And there you can also get a free copy of my book, Madrid Beyond the Guidebook, when you subscribe to my newsletter. And that covers all the places I can't put in the Lonely Planet guide because they're outside neighborhood boundaries. Anyway, let's crack on with today's topic. So, El Rastro, what is it? Let's begin with the history. So, which is really my forte. If you ever look at the Making of Madrid, that started out as a history blog and has evolved into more of a travel blog. But El Rastro is really interesting because it's Madrid's oldest flea market, and the history stretches back even to before the time when Madrid became Spain's capital in 1561. That's when Philip II settled a court here. But before that, Madrid was a town, La Villa de Madrid, and it had a slaughterhouse like any town. But slaughterhouses were incredibly stinky, insanitary affairs in late medieval times. So in 1495, there was an edict that said that the slaughterhouse had to be outside the city walls, and the city walls were much, much smaller then. So the slaughterhouse was placed in what is now known as the Plaza de Cascorro. And it carried on being the city's slaughterhouse for a really, really long time. And this is where the name El Rastro comes from, because you had animals being slaughtered at the slaughterhouse and then dragged down the hill along a street which is known as, that's the main drag of the Rastro now. It's called the Ribera de Curtidores. Curtidores are tanners. So that's the Tanners Road. And there would be this bloody trail of nastiness kind of going all the way down there because the tanners' guilds were all located around there. And this is why the area is what you might refer to as downtown Madrid, lavapiés, embajadores, where really the lowest of the low people kind of lived here. Philip II even kind of demanded that all the brothels be kept in this area so he could keep a tight control over them. There was a big problem with syphilis at the time, and he could get court surgeons to go and visit officially sanctioned brothels. So interesting that, because I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but prostitution has always sort of changed according to the administration, whether or not it's regulated. Anyway, let's get back to the Rastro. So this area had a bit of a kind of unsavory character, and people would come, outside the medieval walls to trade and gamble. They carried on doing so even when the walls were extended to include this area. And Philip II, again, he's a great administrator, and he was getting really, really sick of the fact that Madrid was getting the Madrid streets were getting cluttered with what we would call a mantero. And these are tinkers, unlicensed tinkers, who sell their goods on a blanket, or maybe back in that day it would have been a cloak. And then, then they see the authorities coming, they scarper. But he really wanted to crack down on these tinkers. So he made them all go and stay out, around the slaughterhouse. So he, like with the brothels, he kept all the unsavoriness. So the gambling and the brothels and the tanneries, all this unsavory stuff was out by the Plaza de Cascorro. Interestingly, the modern day manteros also stay around here. So Lavapiés has a big Senegalese population. A lot of these young men are undocumented, but they go selling, sunglasses, knockoff Gucci goods, stuff like this. They get chased by the police a lot. And a lot of them live in Lavapiés. They even have a union. So if you want to support this community because they really struggle, you can find their shop, which is the Union of Manteros, on my website. I'll put a link to that. But yeah, this community is quite marginalized, and we had a big riot that was sparked off by the police targeting them a while back. This is pre-pandemic. A young man called Mame Mabaye was selling things around Sol. He was chased by the police and he collapsed and died near to the Rastro because he was living on Calle del Oso. And the Senegalese community said that the police had just left him to die and they hadn't called an ambulance for him. We don't really know what happened, but it sparked off a riot because these young men, they are really struggling and really at the margins of society. And as is anyone who ever sort of lived in this area throughout the ages. So you had Jewish conversos living there. These are the descendants of people who were Jews who were forced to convert to Christianity. If you want to know more about them, I've got a great interview about them earlier on. You can look for that. There were also the tabacaleras, so the tobacco factory was just at the bottom of the hill near Embajadores Metro, and lots of what's called manolos, and these are sort of working class young Spanish men, and manolas, working class young Spanish women, all living here. So it's only very, very recently that the area has become a little bit gentrified, but I'm happy to say it's still not totally gentrified, and it's where you can get a feeling of real, what we call castizo, which is like real Madrid flavor. If you want to know more about the term castizo, sorry, you can have a look at the episode I did with my Spanish husband about Madrid words and phrases. So for a long time, the market was unregulated. But finally in 1811, it was regulated. But it's really interesting because it feels as if it's always kept this particular character. So I was really interested to read a late 19th century report on the Rastro by Emilia Pardo Bazán, who I'm really interested in at the moment because she's a Galician woman who became a very famous writer. She moved to Madrid, big feminist, sort of writing realist novels in the manner of Zola, Benito Pérez Galdós, who's often called the Spanish answer to Dickens. Anyway, I love Emilia Pardo Bazán because she did very well and was very well respected as a female writer in a time when women really weren't respected. I'm actually writing a novel at the moment. I've just started, set in late 19th century Madrid, which is part of the reason why I've been thinking so much about the Rastro lately. And my heroine, one of my heroines, is going to be slightly based on Emilia Pardo Bazán. So I'm going down a rabbit hole with her. But yeah, she wrote, along with novels, lots of essays on life in Madrid. And it's fascinating because she talks about problems that still exist to this day. So about, beggars, whether or not you should give money because at the time the police were clearing beggars out of the very posh Salamanca area. And she talks about the Rastro. So I've got a few little quotes from her talking about the Rastro. To rastrear, which is sort of hunting for bargains, you must get up with a lark, which is why we night owls never catch anything worth more than half a peseta. But despite arriving late, Don Emilia still shows a great affection for this most long-standing of Madrid markets, calling it a typical, lively, and authentic piece of Madrid. And as today, the whole crowds are just filled with pickpockets, working the crowd, which is kind of annoying because you have to bring cash, but you have to be really, really careful. But she still loves it despite this sort of danger and the fact that she doesn't really see much of value on sale there. She says that the appeal of the Rastro lies in the fact that the modern commerce has simplified shopping to such an extent that it's no longer fun. With fixed prices, the excitement of haggling has all but disappeared. And that's to say that the market is filled with lively characters, which I think it is to this day, and they love debating a lively debate over a fair price for a pair of vintage candlesticks. Now, yesterday I went to the restaurant and I was just listening to the conversations that happened there. And there was this guy saying, "How much does it cost?" And the stall owner just goes, "You tell me, how much do you think it costs?" And this little kind of to and fro is a pleasure, that is not seen in other parts of Madrid. So that's another part of the charm of the Rastro. So how best to enjoy the Rastro? Because it's huge. There are about 30,000 stalls, so over 30,000 stalls. And it covers a vast area that is roughly between 4 different metro stations. So depending on what line you're taking, you can find a metro station that's easy for you. The easiest ones are at the top because it's on a hill, obviously. So you can go northwest is La Latina, northeast is Tieso de Molina Metro, southwest is the Puerta de Toledo Metro, and southeast is Embajadores Metro. Now, I live on line 3 and I live to the south, so I'm always struggling up the hill from Embajadores, but I don't think this is the best way to tackle a visit to the Rastro. You're much better getting off either at La Latina or Tirso de Molina because you're very close to Plaza de Cascoro. Now, of course, the slaughterhouse is no longer there. The slaughterhouse was actually moved out in the 1920s to Matadero, which has now been moved out even further. But that's a big arts centre now that I recommend you go and visit. Where the slaughterhouse once stood has now become a whirlpool of motion, which is around a statue called the Monument to Eloy Gonzalo. Now, this statue was erected in 1902, which is just after Cuba won the War of Independence from Spain. So really funny that they put a local hero up here who actually wasn't so heroic because he's commemorated for carrying a can of gasoline and a torch, marching into enemy territory in the town of Cascoro to blow the whole place up. And in a mission that was thought to be suicidal. And he died of dysentery in the end. Anyway, so this statue is in the middle of the Plaza de Cascoro. And there's this huge swirl of activity. The densest crowds can be found here. And it's not my favorite part of the Rastro because it's, you get a lot of sort of newer goods here. But it lies at the top of the Ribera de Cortedores. So along this main drag that goes down the hill, it dips very steeply along the old Tanner's Hill. You can find new clothes, some tacky souvenirs, Spanish fans, stuff like that. But one of the things I do like about it is that historically there's a little trace of the history there, because there are leather stores towards the bottom. One of them is called Curtidores Roman, and you can buy like riding equipment and things like that there. So that's really interesting that you can see that. And you can still see stalls selling some pretty high quality leather goods. I got a really beautiful leather purse from there years ago, and it's still going strong. So some good things to be had down the Ribera de Cortedores. But it pays to go off from that beaten track a little bit. And let's stick first with the Ribera de Cortedores. So about halfway down on either side, there are gallerias. The most famous of these are the Gallerias Piquer. And this is a lovely place to catch your breath, and a lovely place if you like proper antiques. So they're buildings that are sort of square shaped around a courtyard, lovely old ceramic bench in the Gallerias Piquer, and you can go into shops and buy some antiques there. You might also start to be able to haggle in this area, because haggling, as Emilia Pardo Bazan kind of pointed out, is one of the pleasures of the Rastro. But you have to sort of pick your moments, because all along the Ribera de Cortedores, there's usually the price prominently displayed. But if it isn't displayed, then you can start to have a bit of a conversation about that. So a great place if you're looking to get some proper antiques are these gallerias. And they're also open during the week. So if you're in town and you're not here on a Sunday to catch the Rastro, then you can still go and check the antiques out, because there's antique shops all around the area. Off the Ribera de Cortedores is also a street called the Calle de San Cayetano. Now, this was once great for art, but it's also fantastic for buying picture frames. So there's a picture frame shop run by a guy called Ramirez, and that's really, really fantastic if you're looking for a picture frame. But what I would advise you to do is, if you're in an alternative route from Cascorro, so turning off Cascorro, go down the Calle de las Amazones, and you'll see Bar Santurce on your right, which is a local institution. Do go and drop in there they have cazón, which is like deep fried shark in a batter. They have padron peppers. They have torrezno, which is pork crackling, calamaris, loud, noisy. The owner is famously grumpy, but it's still a great place to go. But carry on down that road and you get to the Plaza del General Vara de Rey. And I just love this square, because not only is it where they have a stage set up in summer for the fiestas that take place in the local area, it's also just one of the best little sub corners of the Rastro, where I just feel like you really get a feel for the local types. So it's a bit of a mix, this square. Really good quality antiques, but I love a rummage, and you've got tables of old clothes, as you can find down the bottom of the Ribera de Cortedores, and just go for a bit of a rummage. And, people are shouting out choyo choyo, which is bargain. And yeah, it's fun. There's great vibes there. Also, a little shout out to another frame shop, Marcos Latina, where you can get some really good quality antique frames. Further down the hill, more towards the Puerta de Toledo metro, you can get to the Plaza del Campillo del Mundo. And this is another area where it's less touristy. The crowds are a little bit less dense, but you can get this real feel of old Madrid. I would say the quality of the antiques are not quite so high here, but it's more of a focus on old magazines. So last time I went, we've just come up to the 50th anniversary of the death of Franco. So there was some old magazine shop showing the front pages from magazines when Franco had just died. Really fascinating, a little glimpse into old Madrid there. And you got a lot of collectibles, so lots of toys, lots of vinyl. And back in the days of punk and the movida madrileña, there were people selling fanzines back in the day. But really just go and have a rummage. It's a lot of fun. I must admit, I hardly ever buy anything. I just love the atmosphere. If I'm stuck for something to do on a Sunday morning, I'll just go and have a walk around the Rastro because I find it so much fun. And if you're a photographer, then there is so much to photograph. Obviously be respectful and ask people if you want to take their photographs. But yeah, it's loads and loads of fun. There's this old lady with her barrel organ. And I would say, like, drop her a few coppers because she's been valiantly going there and playing her barrel organ Sunday in, Sunday out. And she's just such an institution. I think we should support this little piece of Madrid history. The other part now, you're down at the very bottom in the Plaza del Campillo del Mundo Nuevo. If you carry on down the Ronda de Toledo, not in the direction of Toledo, but towards Embajadores Metro, then you'll have another street that is just absolutely full of stuff, mainly electronics, phone covers, stuff for the kitchen, socks, underwear, everything at real bargain prices. So I think a rough rule that doesn't always apply to the Rastro is that the further down you are, the cheaper it is. In fact, that is true to this day, that the further out you are, the further south of Madrid, the cheaper everything is, because I live in Usera, which has now become like the real downtown Madrid. And I go out for a drink and get a glass of wine for, say, less than €3, but they'll give me a really generous tapa. Whereas when I go into the town centre, it's over €4 and the tapa is really negligible. So yeah, that's a different tip for you. Going off on a tangent again, do apologise. Now, actually, I'm really glad I went off on this tangent because that leads me to another thing, which is, are there any other flea markets in Madrid? Is this the only flea market? Well, no, there are tons of different flea markets. And I'll put a link in my website to where you can find these other flea markets. But a couple are sort of near to my barrio. And this is where I also love to go and rummage. And there's all this stuff that you can get at the Rastro, but for even cheaper prices. So if you're really, really out for a bargain hunt, check those other outdoor markets in Madrid, which are all, incidentally, really good for fruit and veg, very cheap fruit and veg. Though I would say, if you're buying fruit and veg, my tip is to go to the indoor markets. So for a while, my husband, Sergio, was going out and buying his fruit and veg at these cheap outdoor markets. But I had to say that the quality was just as poor as you would find in the supermarkets, which of course are really extortionately expensive. And we've decided that we're going to stick back to going to our local fruit market in the indoor market because the quality just can't be beat. And they may be more expensive, but they know us. It's one of the household jobs that I actually adore doing. Like if we have to go and do our groceries, I will go to my local indoor market and chat with the old ladies, chat with the couple that run it. So, yeah. And I think I covered almost everything except for one last tip. So we're talking prices and how to get a bargain. Now, the best way to get a bargain is to get up as early as you can in the morning and scour the place. And it's really difficult if you're not an early riser because I am actually, so I love doing that. But by around 10:30, 11, the Rastro gets really, really busy. It's totally chaotic. Hold on to your purse because, pickpockets are all around. And as I said earlier, I think, do bring cash because very few stall holders are going to accept cards. And that about rounds it up. So really do go and visit the Rastro if you're planning a trip to Madrid and just enjoy it. Even if you don't buy anything, it's a spectacle in itself. Rastro is, one of my 10 out of 10 stars. Absolutely do this. Don't hesitate. And with that, I'll wrap up and maybe just underline once again that if you've enjoyed this episode, please do give me a positive rating or think of visiting my website, themakingofmadrid.com, and perhaps buying a copy of my book, Quiet Madrid, which shows you all the tranquil sides to Madrid. And if you subscribe to my mailing list that comes out about once every 2 weeks, then you'll get a free copy of my book, Madrid Beyond the Guidebook. All right, well, thanks for listening and goodbye.